We recognize that CVUUS gathers on land seized from the Western Abenaki by European colonizers. We respect the Abenaki's spiritual relationship to the land and waters of the Champlain Valley. We are committed to building a peaceful and more just relationship with them and to promoting knowledge about their history and culture. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to CVUUS, Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. At CVUUS, we strive to be an inclusive and welcoming community that sustains a liberal religious tradition. We aspire to be visible and active on behalf of social justice and environmental responsibility. We nurture and empower each other at all ages on our spiritual journeys, and we reach out to the larger communities of which we are a part. So welcome. Here we are in the third week of winter, and it's a kind of dark and gloomy day. I just went outside. There's a little ice coming out of the sky here in Cornwall, and some real weather coming in the middle of the week. This is our hunkering down time. But we are getting a little bit more sun every day, and I can tell that that's happening, and that gives us lots of hope. I'm Carl Lindholm, a member of the worship team, and I'm serving as the worship associate today for our minister, Barnaby Feeder. And the theme today is animals, animal lives, celebration, and lessons. I hope you have read this in every week's blast, the weekly newsletter that Laura produces every Wednesday. It goes into the many pathways to connection that we have here at CVUUS. I will mention just a couple that keep in mind that the CVUUS Race in America Book Club is discussing Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson, a terribly important book. And that reading group, the first meeting will be, I think it's January 26th. Can somebody correct me there? Give me the right thing. I have it in my notes elsewhere. Anyway, it's not for a couple of weeks. It's a wonderful book, and our group will be led by Gene Terwilliger and Mike Greenwell. Mike Greenwood. Some of you know Mike Greenwell was a great left fielder for the Red Sox. I call him Mike Greenwell most of the time, I'm afraid. Today, also next week, we will have our congregational conversation on a similar topic, dismantling systemic racism. So next week's coffee hour will be a congregational conversation. Please do stay for the coffee hour today. If you have milestones and passages for today that you haven't gotten to Barnaby at this time, do put them in the chat, and I'll keep my eye out for them. Okay, let us worship together. Now, for today's call to worship, I've chosen a lovely little poem by Frost. It may be familiar to many of you. I think which well suggests the connection in the natural world between animals and humans, and the way our spirits can be lifted by that connection. Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. The Sage of Ripton. Now for our chalice lighting, I have a nice, oops, there we go. Nice little chalice facsimile here. I'll turn the light on. So perhaps you will read with me, the lines from our chalice lighting on the screen. May the light of this chalice give light and warmth to our community when we are joyful and when we despair. And may we feel the warmth spread from our circle to wider and wider circles until all know they belong to the one circle of life.
Thanks, Carl. So good morning, everyone.
Morning.
It really is great. I'm actually kind of a sucker for Zoom because of getting to see all of you so well. When we went back in person, as some of you might know, I actually kind of missed Zoom because you just get to see everybody so nicely and see everybody's faces, and there's just something so intimate about it despite the distance. So I'm very happy to be here this morning with you. And what I'm going to do during this time for all ages is have a time for us to share a bit about animals that have been a blessing to us. And we'll be sharing in the chat. So I need to actually see something. Can you just raise your hand or paw if you know how to type something into the chat? So can you just give me kind of a show of hands? Do you actually know how to do this? Okay, and then there's obviously some people who I can't see you, so that's okay. Oh, thank you. You're raising virtual hands. So thank you for that. So there are some people who don't know how to do it. So I'm just going to quickly tell you something about it. And then if you're still wanting to share later and you have not been able to figure out the chat, I'll just have a moment where you can wave. But there's so many of us, if there were 10 of us, we could all just unmute and talk about our animals, right? But there's too many. So that's why we're doing the chat. I also think the chat gives us a chance to actually get to write, but also take the time to see to really notice what everybody else is saying in a way that I have found can be kind of meditative. So thank you for giving me that information. So I want to start by telling you that we have a possum living under our side porch right now. And I cannot begin to tell you how much joy this possum has brought me. I have a cat also, like a very old cat. She's actually 19 and sleeping on the floor behind me. But this possum just showed up and we saw it in the yard, in the front yard in the daytime, which is a little weird, but when it's cold, possums will do that. Sometimes they'll come out anyway, and it was sniffing around under a tree, eating berries and stuff. And it's so amazing to me to get to watch wild animals, especially ones you don't get to see very often, just kind of doing their thing. There's something really magical about it. And the entire family ended up standing at the window watching the possum in the yard. It was hardly doing anything for about 20 minutes, probably. Even my husband, JP, who honestly, I'm going to tell you, I think kind of hates animals. I did not find this out until I married him. I just want to be clear. But he tolerates them. He tolerates our cat and feeds her and all of those things. But even JP, who thinks possums are kind of creepy with their weird little ratty tails, was standing at the window watching that possum for about 20 minutes. And the next day the possum came out and JP called up to me, "The possum's back." And I ran downstairs and the possum was there again. So, you know, there's kind of a magic that I think can come from wild animals, especially showing up. But I've gotten completely obsessed with this possum, honestly. Like, I did all this reading about possums and, you know, what can you feed them? Because I felt like it's cold and I can tell it's sleeping under the porch because I'll see little prints kind of coming out into the snow. And so I looked up what to feed it, and I've been cutting up an apple and leaving it outside, and then the apple is gone and it's very exciting. And I also found an article that basically said, here are all the things you should do to attract possums, and we suggest that you do not tell your neighbors you're doing this, because they'll get really mad at you. So if any of you know Ed and Dolores, who live next to me, please do not tell them that I have actually been feeding the possum. So this leads me to the question, how many of you have had a time where, first I want to ask about a wild animal. How many of you have had a time where you just had an animal sighting or experience, an animal just showed up outside somewhere and you felt like it was some sort of blessing to just get to see it? Have any of you had that? You can wave or nod or whatever. Why does that feel like such a gift to have, especially if the animal looks at you? Have you ever had that moment where you're somewhere and there's an animal in the woods or something and it just stops and looks at you? It just feels like such a gift to be seen that way. I don't even know why. Animals can be such a blessing to us, and especially during a time in our lives where we're having to spend so much time inside. I think for some of us, they've become even more essential than they might already have been. So I want to take some time to get to share about the animals that you've seen. Just bear with me for 1 second. Whoop. I tried to print something yesterday and had all these problems. So now I'm trying to see it in another way, and I don't think I'm going to be able to, so that's okay. So take a moment to think about animals that have been blessings for you in some way. They might be wild, they might be pets, they might be animals in your life right now, or from the past, from your childhood. Maybe animals you saw in videos. I get a lot of joy out of animal videos, frankly. Maybe stuffed animals that had a very, very real relationship with you. So think about those animals for just a moment. And in a second, I'm going to invite Ronnie to start playing some music for us. And we're going to share about them in the chat. And we're going to do it in 3 groups of sharings, not people. So the first share, and I'll say this again in a moment, will be animals that we have lost in this past year or longer ago. And then the next sharing will be animals that right now in the present day are bringing us joy or comfort or peace or play or stillness, or something else. And then the last one will be animals that don't fit into either of those categories. So we'll do some sharing with some music. I really encourage you to share if you want to, but take the time to read everything in the chat. To type in the chat, just for those who aren't sure they know how to do it, you click the chat button, type what you want, and make sure to hit enter on your keyboard or your phone. Otherwise, everybody can't see it until you click that enter. And you'll want to keep kind of scrolling down in the chat to see what other people have written. You can respond to other people in the chat. Also, if someone says something and you have a feeling about that, go ahead and respond to them. And then at some moment when I feel like things are slowing down or we need to just shift things because of the time, I'll say, so we're going to wrap that one up. And now and I'll invite in the next group. And then at the very end, there'll be a moment where I will offer a short blessing for all of these animals. And then we'll close and move on to the offering. So, Ronnie, if you want to go ahead and start with some writing music, and I invite people to share in the chat animals that they have lost in the last year or older. You could say the name, you could say what the animal is. Up to you. All right. So let's take one more moment for last animals in this place, and there will be time again in a little bit also. And now I invite you to think of animals either in your house, your yard, somewhere else that are bringing you joy, comfort, peace, a blessing, maybe something you can't even put your finger on right now. Who are those animals? if you're not wanting to write or read right now, you can just tune into Ronnie's playing. Enjoy a moment of being here with all of us. And I want to lift up Francois's dog Princess. I'm not sure if he typed her name or not, but I know that he had earlier. And I know that she brings him a lot of joy. So the last category is any other animal you just want to share with us that didn't really fit into either category. Maybe an animal you saw when you were young. And I don't know if there are any other animals to list here, but this will be our last moment of sharing an animal name or something about an animal in the chat. Let's have just one last little moment for sharing. Speaking of blessings, how about Ronnie? That is really a blessing. Thank you so much. I texted him last night at about midnight to say, hey, do you want to play some music in the middle of my thing? And he said, sure. I said, just play whatever you want. Okay. So that's what you get when he plays whatever he wants. Pretty good, huh? So let's close with a blessing. I know that this time for all ages is called blessing the animals in our lives, but as we all know, they bless us so much. And to me, that's really the main thing I think about when I think about the animals, is how much they give me. So I invite you to hold your animal or close your eyes and picture an animal or animals that you want to receive this blessing, or just know that the blessing goes out to all of them. You don't need to worry about naming them all. None will be missed. So just as the animals give us such blessing and such joy, we want to bless the animals as well. We hold these animals in our heart. We say thank you for how they have blessed us, do bless us for what they give us, and we send them our blessings and our peace and our thanks. And I'm going to close, since you're all here, by just giving a bonus blessing to all of you, because I know lately I've been really wanting one. So my closing blessing to all of you, as long as you're here, is I hope that today, just as you are able to bring animals into your heart so easily, that you can bring yourself into your heart today. And think about the ways that you are a blessing to yourself, that you're enough, you're doing enough, you are enough. And try to have moments of really saying that to yourself and feeling that. May it be so. Love to all of you. And here is our dear Reverend Barnaby to introduce the offering.
And the blessing of remembering to unmute, which is pretty rare. So great to have you back, Poppy, with us during our worship. We've really missed you during the time you were away. And we look forward to more mornings like this. It's always an important part of our worship, even though we tend to bury it in the middle and it sometimes goes by rapidly, that we do share our financial resources with some other organization in the world that's out there doing something that helps make our values real in the world. And when the donations team met last year to figure out what we were going to do with January, we could see that the COVID virus was gaining strength again, contrary to what we had hoped for by this time. And we decided that a particular spot of vulnerability was what was happening overseas. And we chose as our donee for this month what's known as COVAX. It's an arm of UNICEF, the United Nations body. And it is particularly dedicated to supporting programs for sharing vaccines internationally with countries that are not getting these supplies at all, or just not getting them rapidly enough. And they've been ramping up rapidly in the past year. And December, they reached their record for a month of 910 million doses distributed to 144 countries. And yet they're still far short of their goal of 2 billion doses going out to countries that need them. In some parts of the world, this is really a disastrous situation. Most nations in Africa are well below the modest initial target of 40% vaccination rates. Carl, you and Brett will be interested to know, having spent time in Cameroon, that nation is under 4% in its vaccination rate. Africa as a whole is only 9% vaccinated. So this is really important work, and I invite you to be as generous as you're able in supporting it. This is the time in our service where we share milestones and passages, joys and concerns in our life. I did not receive any explicit sharings for this week, although in talking to a lot of you, I know you had, as in every week, lots of things to share. Because we're very strict about not sharing things that we don't have explicit permission to share, I'm not going to pass on some of the information I received that would certainly qualify as a milestone, and instead invite you into a time of silent meditation or prayer, or whatever it is that you do to locate where your heart is this morning, and what, if you were standing next to someone that you consider close to you in the congregation at coffee hour, you would make sure they know about what's going on in your life. And so after that time, Ronnie will bring us out with a beautiful hymn, The Lone Wild Bird.
Wild bird in lofty flight is still with thee, nor leaves thy sight, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me. The ends of earth are in thy hand, the seas dark, deep, and far off land, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me.
When I actually to I'm getting my connection right now, so picture disappeared. I'm trying to preserve, and then I hope it will work out okay. So I this reflection that to in my life about a concept of strangers, those with whom only minimal contact can affect the days. I encountered this concept in 2000 consequences. With intervening years, then my memory has morphed the word consequential into significant. And I looked it up and I found that consequence and significance are almost synonyms. Significant means noteworthy in and of itself, and consequential means noteworthy because of some effect or result that occurs. And I find that I'm much more attracted to the idea of something being noteworthy in and of itself because it enlarges the world and it helps me to step outside of myself and consider another. There are already enough things that make me see myself as ludicrously central to some small part of the world's functioning. And when something takes me away from that, I'm grateful. Some significant strangers in my life are the woman who sits outside her community home in Brandon, whom I once gave a ride to, and the awkward middle-aged couple who walks slowly hand in hand through the neighborhood that takes me to work every morning. Also, the two enormous steers who lorded over a prominent Route 7 pasture in Salisbury for many years. A hulking black and white animal and his only slightly smaller chocolatey gray friend, Dribbles and Shy. Dribbles and Shy were visibly bonded. They would stand shoulder to shoulder and groom each other constantly. Whenever you saw one, you would see the other. And I wondered about their story. How did they get there? Why were they spared the usual fate of bovines in Vermont? And did their evident fondness for each other give anybody pause to wonder about their capacity for feeling? Did that wonder extrapolate to others of their kind? I believe that wondering about the lives of the beings we pass in our daily rounds can, like reading fiction is said to do, enormously enlarge the empathy muscle. For almost 12 years, I commuted from Brandon to Middlebury, sometimes passing Dribbles and Shy 3 to 4 times a day. And nearly every time I would, almost involuntarily, make sure to spot them. Seeing them grazing, dozing, munching hay, grooming each other as I cruised by was a brief glimpse of a completeness that calmed and comforted me. As the years went by, I did wonder about them. How long could they live? What would happen when there was only one? I felt anticipatory grief. And last month in mid-December, on an overcast afternoon, I was driving to Brandon and I did not see Dribbles. Dark imaginings entered my mind. And the next day, a donation in his memory was made to Homeward Bound. And I felt a jolt of sorrow. My world was somehow changed. Since then, I have seen a couple of smaller cows in with Shy, and I hope they comfort him. He and Dribbles were certainly a comfort to me, and I shall miss them.
Thank you, Jess. Now for the readings today. Our first reading is excerpted from a poem called God Got a Dog by children's author Cynthia Rylant. It was first published in 2003. She never meant to. She liked dogs, but she didn't think she had time for a dog now. She was always working, and dogs needed so much attention. God didn't know if she could take being needed by one more thing. But she saw this dog out by the tracks, and it was hungry and cold and lonely, and God realized she made that dog somehow. Somehow she was responsible, though she knew logically that she had only set the world on its course. But she felt bad, so she took it on home and named it Ernie. And now God has someone keeping her feet warm at night. Our second reading comes from the French author Anatole France. Until one has loved an animal, a part of one's soul remains unawakened. Thus ends the readings for today.
Thank you so much, Carl. I gave you 2 readings today. The second one, I hope, needs no explication. So I'm going to talk mostly about the first reading. One of my favorite parts of God Got a Dog, the poem Carl just read to you, comes just after she encounters the cold and lonely stray dog out by the railroad tracks. Cynthia Rylant wrote, God realized she'd made that dog somehow. Somehow she was responsible, though she knew logically that she had only set the world on its course. And the whole poem is going to turn now on this sense of responsibility that God has that isn't logical, on something that God knows that isn't logical, a bad feeling just in that moment. In this poem, God trusts that feeling as a source of knowledge about what to do. God doesn't know if she can take being needed by one more thing, but she brings the dog home and gives it a name. And this time, it works out. Now there is someone, no, not something, someone keeping her feet warm at night. It's a really wonderful metaphor, both for how at home love is in living bodies and how individualized building more love in the universe can be. But look at it this way. A generation before we slipped into pandemic mode, Cynthia Rylant could imagine people, and even God, feeling what so many of us feel today. Some of us feel it occasionally, and some of us nearly all the time, but I think we all know it by now, that overwhelming sense that our emotions are at odds with what we know logically. We dutifully draw boundaries on what we will do and who we will let into our lives and how, in order to keep our own health and sanity and to protect our closest relationships and the larger community. But it's so hard to view the opportunity to fight the pandemic this way as a sustained blessing. In the long run, it isn't a fulfilling way to live. This is not to disparage the coldly logical evidence that's supporting the value of social distancing, vaccination, masking, and spending precious resources on repeated testing, air purifiers, and other forms of protection isn't important. These things are clearly socially beneficial and a good bet to benefit us as individuals. But I don't think anyone should feel guilty about feeling rebellious when it comes to the restrictions. And no one should be surprised at feeling envious or judgmental toward those around us who ignore the scientific guidance and legal guidelines more often and more flagrantly than we do. What are we to do with this conflict between duty and emotion? Like Rylant's God, we humans collectively set the world on its course toward a situation where this pandemic could flourish. Now, those who are most vulnerable among us have increased odds of ending up dead, injured, lonely, undernourished, cold, in other words, harmed in all of the ways humans can harm each other. We are somehow responsible, even if there is no logic for blaming any of us individually for a particular situation where the person or animal we see suffering is suddenly in front of us, literally, or simply in our field of awareness. I think it's important that Rylant's God is putting aside logic in favor of compassion and love, and not just for personal pleasure. It's also important to note, as we saw in some of our blessings during the Time for All Ages, this story can't really end with a warm, grateful dog around your feet. In another poem called God Went to India, Rylant's God wants to visit the elephants. God is a he in this poem, and he's convinced elephants are the best thing he ever made. They do everything he hoped for, the poet tells us. And one thing in particular impresses God, how elephants visit the graves of those they loved and spend hours fondling dry bones. Rylant wrote, God understands mourning better than any other emotion, better even than love. You make life, you make death. The things God makes always turn into something else, and he does find that good, but he can't help missing the originals. Who here doesn't know that feeling of missing the originals, even in their relationship with themselves? Some of us feel content and blessed with what we've experienced and where we have arrived. Some of us are having a harder time with that. But I'm guessing we all miss aspects of our original younger selves, first experiences, and peak performances that can never be duplicated, or in a relationship that felt original in our lives, original in the sense of being where some aspect of what we treasure, or even some aspect of what we fear today, originated. When we perceive such a moment of birth, we are seeing a new thing in the history of the universe. Nothing less than witnessing history, nothing less than clear proof we are never isolated from the incomprehensibly vast web of existence. That contact with originality and awareness of it in our lives is something, it's a truth that we can never escape. There's a lot to be terrified in that. But there's also this: whatever love is coursing through this inescapable web of existence and down through time somehow passes through us just because we were lucky enough to be born. Somehow we are responsible for what is being created as long as we lived. And somehow whatever is divine in us is going to feel bad if we walk by an Ernie, or anything or anybody that can be comforted by our expressing love. What all of these situations have in common, I believe you'll find, is contact with otherness. Otherness feels like a dangerous word these days. We spend a lot of time trying to preach to each other that the boundaries that separate us are illusions. We are all truly one. That the worst thing about politics today is the constant distinguishing between one group and another, so that people in power can set them against each other. We have a word for it: othering. And that way lies castes, racism, sexism, and so many other oppressions. But othering is so instinctual for us, as far as we can tell. All life forms have this experience of othering, that we could be foolish to presume it is some form of original sin to be eliminated if possible. And I think that is why I really wanted to talk about othering as we celebrate the lives of animals. In dealing with animals, it is a little less threatening to accept that, no, we are not all one. What we all are is connected. In so many ways, it is our ability to get so much pleasure out of our connections with animals, whose otherness is so obvious, that teaches us connection is even more sacred than unity. One of the Native American traditions we ought to pay more attention to is the tradition of thanking every game animal killed for agreeing to give up its life so that the people can survive. Another is that, unlike our Western religious creation stories, Native American creation stories almost always have animals participating with gods and humans and making the world as we know it. Such traditions come with some obvious warnings for humanity. We should not thoughtlessly take more than is needed to survive in hard times. And in times of plenty, we should not carelessly take so much that the capacity of other animal species to share our planet is extinguished. The horror of the scale of species extinction and factory farming we are fostering with our wasteful, self-indulgent lifestyle and runaway population growth would be much more apparent if this was our ethic. Animals are biological kin to us, but not such close kin that millions more humans is equivalent in the web of life to millions of other species. Through our pets especially, but also through observation in the wild and zoos of undomesticated animals, we can learn the signs of when we ought to feel bad about what we are seeing. The signs of when the world we are somewhat responsible for creating is going haywire for them as well as us. If we are looking with compassion and respect, we are going to constantly find ourselves in awe of their intelligence and cleverness. One thing we are learning is that empathy the ability to identify feelings and intentions across species lines is much more widespread than we once thought. Dee Carroll shared a story with me this week that may not surprise many of you. Dee wrote, "When I was pregnant with our first son, Jim, I found as my labor progressed at home that I was most comfortable when I was on my knees, elbows on the couch, as if I were praying. I experienced less pain, but enough for our dog, Frosty, a medium-sized white poodle, to take notice. He came up beside me and stretched himself along my body as if to say, 'I know you hurt. I want to make it better.' I have always remembered and marveled at his understanding and empathy." Many of us have experienced similar moments of pets reading us or us reading them so well that there's an uncanny feeling of truly being bonded in a loving relationship. But it's not just empathy. Let's talk about animal creativity, which could be defined as developing novel ways to cope with environmental challenges, to experiment, and even to play. It is much more widespread than previously believed, especially among relatively large-brained species of mammals, birds, and invertebrate sea creatures like squids and octopuses. Incidentally, and score one here for Vermont, creativity is also more common among non-migratory birds than those who fly long distances to avoid the challenges of winter. There is one overriding reason we underestimate animal intelligence and creativity. They lack the breadth of skills and technology we have to record what we are doing, so that others coming after can build on our innovations and avoid our missteps. Animals only learn new skills by copying. The truth is that we have done such a poor job of documenting what is, quote, normal, unquote, behavior for so many animals in so many settings that we really don't recognize many activities we encounter for the creativity that they actually include. Thus, we miss a staggering amount of truth about the nature of life from not honoring their otherness with closer attention. As I get older, and particularly as I continue to deepen my identity as a minister, I find myself becoming more respectful of the process of knowing through storytelling. This doesn't come at the expense of my respect for science. The work that people like Mark Spreitzer do in animal behavior research, trying to understand what is happening chemically and biologically in animal brains and bodies, is illuminating, and it is critical to better understanding the world we live in. And it's vital that it be done with scientific rigor that rejects the human impulse to regard things that look and feel familiar as evidence that animals are just like us. What looks like a smile can actually be the opposite in an animal. That same rigor is necessary to discover when things that initially look unfamiliar are in fact more like us than we realize. It's a realm for data, not stories, where our imagination can fill in vital details. That said, though, I'm increasingly impressed at our skill at telling ourselves stories that explain our feelings and illuminate truths we can't attain via logic and the data that's on hand. Now, that shouldn't surprise you if you've been attending worship regularly for a while. A year ago, I devoted several sermons to imagined conversations between me and Philia, the small owl known only to the wider world as a bird named Rocky, because it had been trapped in the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree when the tree was cut down and shipped to New York. You may recall that my Philia was in every respect a true representative of her species, except for her command of English in my stories, her fondness for my dog Pan's treats, and her unpredictably wide knowledge of the things that I wanted to inquire about. This power to imagine in search of truth is especially important at this time when we are suffering so much from restrictions on how we can be with each other. I, for one, welcome more animal stories along with more animal science. I hope they will be grounded in something we can only surmise. Animal otherness is one of our greatest blessings. Let us show we grasp this by striving to be more thankful for and respectful of it. There are an infinite number of ways to take Ernie home. May Champlain Valley UUs be known as folks who encourage each other to explore them. May the warmth we feel nestling up to us in the evening, maybe it won't end up looking like an individual animal. Maybe it will be the satisfaction of reading about more and more organic, localized farming, and speaking graces at mealtimes that name the sacredness of all we consume. Maybe it will be reading about or even contributing to efforts that result in a species of animals graduating from the endangered species list to no longer threatened. Maybe it will just be a memory of feeling like you were among a fellowship of humans getting better at loving otherness when you are among us. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
We celebrate the web of life, its magnitude we sing, for we can see divinity in every living thing. A fragment of the perfect whole, its cactus and its quail, as much in tiny barnacle as in the great blue whale. Of ancient dreams we are the sum, our bones link stone to star, and bind our future worlds to come with worlds that were and are. Respect the water, land, and air, which gave all creatures birth. Protect the lives of all that share the glory of the earth.
Thank you, Ronnie. I think it's wonderful that all of us can revel in the feelings of warmth and companionship the animals we know bring into our lives, and that all of us can stop for a moment and be awed by the beauty of something we see in the wild. I hope today that as you go forth and in the weeks to come, that you can also tell the story that reminds you that underneath the warmth and comfort of these feelings is a greater, more important truth, a truth named in that last hymn, that whatever divinity is in us is also in these animals and in our connection to them, that there's something even bigger than the beauty of the feelings we feel in the minute, and even more precious, and that helps you do the work to honor that glory. Blessed be.
Yay. Thank you, Ronnie, and everybody so much.